Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 33 of the Black Swan Podcast. Thanks for tuning in again. I took a little family time over the recent Easter weekend and wasn't able to get together a brand new podcast, so I thought it would be fun to resurrect a few prior podcast conversations and make a little best of episode. What we're going to dig into is some specific thoughts and comments about improvisation in the percussion world from several BSP artists, including Gloria Yehilievsky, Anthony Bartolo, Andrew Baldwin, and Tony DiSanza. Each are active in overlapping and contrasting areas of performance, so it's interesting to hear about their individual processes and projects connected to improvisation from past episodes. I'll start with Gloria to get the conversation rolling. In this excerpt, she had just finished telling me about Sounding Eye Collective, which is her collaboration with visual artists and musicians, and their latest project called Dream or Fly and Other Stories. This is a 45-minute online and offline performance combining multi-screen animation plus contemporary and jazz music.
Where do you want to start? Do you want to start from the beginning or just the concept of why it's important?
I guess the beginning, like how did you first get interested in exploring improvisation and then kind of building I don't know if it's a philosophy or a concept.
Yeah. So I always played jazz in middle school, high school. I was in the jazz bands on vibes and piano, kind of back and forth between the two. I couldn't really decide on one. And so I always had this, I just liked groove, but that wasn't, super, there wasn't a ton of improv. It was just that has the origin in it. And I continued that in undergrad. I was taking some lessons, but the kind of catalyst was I went to Sweden in the winter of 2014, 2015.
Right.
And that was where I started with Anders Ostrand and Daniel Berg.
Right.
And those guys, Anders is the freest musician ever. And, my first lesson with him, I played that marimba piece, Ultimatum.
Okay.
And then he was like, okay, now get on the floor and play the entire thing with your mallets on the floor. Like, play the rhythm. And then the next thing was like, okay, let's do something else. And then he would just start like comping and he'd be like, okay, we're in C, like go for it.
Yeah.
Like, just play. And I hadn't done something that open before, but
right.
It was amazing. I mean, that was, the most eye-opening lesson. And then Daniel Berg, he comes at improvisation. He was the one who actually, this concept of guided improvisation came from. Like, Anders was the one who really inspired the energy to it. And
Sure.
Daniel Berg, he's more of a classical guy. And he's written some solos, marimba solos, and I think on various instruments, but he's mostly a marimba player, that help classical musicians to improvise. So one piece was Fantasia and Toccata, and the first movement of that is you have all these boxes and you can just move through them freely. So it's like you're playing the written material, but you have a choice of what order you play it in.
Yeah.
And he told me, he wrote this to help classical musicians improvise. And I was like, there's got to be more like this. And so that started a couple years of research of just finding these pieces. And I keep coming across more, and I'm a little bit, I should be diligent about updating it, but right. I'm a little like, I don't know, it feels like it's in the past.
Yeah.
So that inspired me a lot because I valued improvisation because I saw how it made me feel and I saw how it made other people feel.
Sure.
And I was like, but classical musicians are scared to do it. They're uncomfortable with it. And I think
yeah.
it's almost essential because if you're going to be a musician, you got to be able to just play. You can't be like, I can't play right now because I don't have my music.
Yeah.
Like, because that's not, I mean, of course you're a musician, you're like, your voice is valid, and like I'm sure that when you play with your music, it's great. But you also have to have the freedom to. Yes, a lot of people memorize, but you have to have the freedom to know your instrument and play that. And even if you don't do it in public, right. Even if you just do it for yourself, like there's something inherently valuable with connecting with your instrument in that way and exploring it and getting to know it as person and instrument. It's not. We have multiple layers of person, music, hands, mallets, instrument. Like that's too much separation.
Yeah.
It's too many degrees of separation. So we need to be able to connect with the instrument.
Yeah, a couple thoughts that just kind of come to mind. The term guided improvisation sounds sort of, at first it sounds like sort of an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp or something, like guided improvisation, like improvisation should just be free, but then the guided.
Nobody's ever said that. So that's cool.
But guided, I think, totally makes sense in how you've explained it, that you almost need parameters. You need, and especially maybe for a more orchestral musician, like, okay, you can take some of these elements that you're already totally familiar with and maybe then reorganize them and experiment with them. And it does kind of remind me, long time ago, I was in school, Gloria. I went to music school. This was 20 years ago or so. But, learning about, 12-tone music, or, stuff, that atonal music, and the concept of being...
That's the most prescribed thing.
Exactly. And
even in Bach, there's tons of improv. Oh, that I won't talk about Bach. I mean, in the classical, in Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich, like, there's a lot of interpretation there. You don't have two of the same Shostet. But...
in the whole idea of like, okay, we're breaking free of like kind of this tradition and trying to do something totally different, but yet we have these parameters to like sort of set all this up. And so I think it is actually a cool idea. It's like, okay, it can almost be overwhelming if you're just like improvise and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do or where to go or what to kind of put this together. So it's almost like more limiting because you don't have a direction. So maybe, guided improvisation, to me at first it sounds like strange, but then I'm like, okay, that actually makes sense. Like, okay, you need maybe a direction to go, or you need some elements to start putting something together, and becomes less like, too much freedom becomes limiting, I guess, in a sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or I have no idea what I'm talking about, and I just need to go back to selling tambourines.
No. That makes total sense. That makes 100. And I think, like, as humans, we need structure. We like to have order.
Yeah.
Because everything goes to entropy naturally.
Yeah.
So, any sense of order, feels good. It feels satisfying. And I think there's a point that there's a little crest that you go over, and before that, you're a child and you're free and you can just do, and you're not afraid to try something and just go for it. Yep. But then you learn too much about something and you're too good, and now you need to have the sense of control, and the idea of going back or just trying something, just improvising is scary, because it's like, wait, but I know this thing and this is what works and this is what doesn't work, and I need to stick with that because I know what that is. I know what those parameters are. I have those parameters. They make sense to me. So the way out of that is by using those parameters to help you be free. And it certainly helped me. And it wasn't like a clear linear trajectory, but looking back now, I can see it's like, okay, I was doing a lot of these guided improv things, and it wasn't easy at first. You had to prepare a lot, and you had to really like set yourself up for success. I didn't want to go into, I couldn't just go and read a piece and that just be like, I had to practice all of if I'm playing the box piece, where you're going from one box to the other, I had to practice all those transitions and really get to know the boxes. Yeah. And so that was basically like learning any other classical piece. But eventually you just start to let go of that and be comfortable with that.
Yeah. Another, point you made earlier about just connection to your instrument, and what I want to move into is more of that kind of communication, I guess, like using your instrument as a form of communication, which is what I think you were sort of starting to touch on.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked about that.
Yeah. Oh, great. See, I did a little research, Gloria. We've had what I think is cool about these types of conversations is we've met several times before. We've had conversations about your music and your life, but I always find something new with like people that I talk to. So, and that's why I dig a little bit more. I kind of go off of conversations that we've had already, but I know, like music as communication is sort of one of your, maybe a mantra. It's your thing.
It's communication through music.
Yeah.
And it was, it didn't matter how music as communication, it doesn't matter how that's articulated. It's not the point. It was just at there was a stage when I was asking myself, what is music? What is music? What is music? What is music? And I couldn't answer, and I had conversations with other people, and they had this certain answer that I didn't agree with, and I was envious of that kind of confidence or belief in, this is what music is,
right.
And just having that security, because I didn't have that. I kept asking myself over and over again, and I began to realize that words are not the best form of communication. If you think about, how you think, we're not thinking in words. We often think in words and we recognize that, but if you really look at how you think, like if anybody meditates a lot, or if you just pay attention, spend a few moments, it's like you understand things without using the words to describe it. You observe things, you accumulate knowledge without having a description on it. So putting something into words is like the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so that combined with what made music valuable to me, which it didn't matter as a performer or as an audience member. Honestly, it's more fun as an audience member because you get to just listen and enjoy. And it was the fact that I always felt something. There was a story being told that could not possibly have been told in words, right? And even if it's, some people write music more like absolute music for music's sake, that's still a form of communication. You're still communicating a musical message, and it does, regardless of how hard you try to make it not about something or not a story, everyone's going to go to that concert and put themselves into it. Like whenever you listen to a piece of music, you relate yourself to it. If that music is about depression, then you relate it to whenever you had hard times or whenever you were lonely. If the music is about if it's Afro-Cuban Latin music, you want to dance and you put yourself into this groove of feeling light and wanting to dance and wanting to have rum. And so everyone puts themselves, that's what I would put into. Somebody else might respond to Afro-Cuban music of, I hate this, it's really boring,
right.
It's repetitive, and that's them putting themselves into it. That's, all part of the communication.
Now we're going to hear from Anthony Bartolo, and this is right after the release of his latest EP, Whimsical by Nature, which includes a lot of pre-composed and improvised music with an ambient experimental twist. Anthony talks about some of his structuring concepts and partnerships, including a book of 10 improvisation etudes he's released and a collaboration with Gloria Yehilievsky. Of course, we'll have links for all this in our show notes. So then after Rowan, you went to Ithaca, was that right?
I did, yeah. And so I studied with Gordon Stout there, and that was just like a life-changing experience for me. And Gordon is still like a good friend and a mentor to me. Yeah. And the best part about being there with Gordon was that he just makes everything look so easy.
Sure.
And also makes everything just seem like it's possible. And so that's actually what also honed my composition skills there. I actually started composing at Rowan.
Okay.
And I wrote my first concert piece there, which is Music for 5 Marimbas. And that piece, we premiered it there. And then when I got to Ithaca, Gordon just kept encouraging me to compose more. And I also honed my free improvisation skills actually there because, the story that I always remember, I know I'm backtracking a little bit, was from Rowan. When I first got really into free improv was when I used to go into this side practice room at night, and it would be like me and then maybe one or two guitar players, a bass player, maybe a horn player or something, and we would just shut the lights out and just go nuts. And it was most of the time I played drum set, but sometimes I'd wheel marimba in there. I'd play just found objects and we just were I was just there at a time. I don't even know that happens now, unfortunately, but I was just there at a time where there was a lot of people into just exploratory music.
Sure.
And so it was just a really cool, eye-opening time. And so I got into free improv while I was at Rowan, and then at Ithaca, I was honing my composition skills with Gordon, and then he also, was super supportive of my free improv. And then my first recital there, my grad recital, I had a program of 4 or 5 pieces, and I said, Gordon, I think I want to just improvise transitional material through it. And he said, go for it. So I ended up doing like a 50-minute nonstop program where I like seamlessly, had like a set piece that was composed, and then I improvised transitional material into the next one and that. And people like went nuts over it. So I was like, it was the first time where I was like, oh my God, people actually kind of like to hear me improvise. I thought I was just doing it for me.
Yeah. So the improvisations, and I mean, this is all stuff that I wanted to get into, so I guess no time like the present here. So, So the improvisation at that time, at Ithaca, going from like programmed piece to programmed piece, how did you approach that? You were taking kind of elements from the piece that you just ended, and then kind of transitioning to elements from the piece you were about to play, or like how did you sort of approach that improv?
Yeah. That was part of it. I would take themes, but I also, like, by the end of the program, I actually kind of was even using themes from earlier on.
Oh,
and
sure.
kind of like I made like a whirlwind of kind of, I guess, concepts from all the pieces that I played and kind of strung it together.
Yeah. So I was having a conversation with Gloria Yehilievsky like a week or so ago, and she's part of her kind of philosophy is also improvisation, and she talked a little bit about kind of, I know it seems counterintuitive, but the structure of improvisation. Like, do you kind of have a philosophy or a mindset that when you're going into an improvisation session, like how you're going to approach it, or do you give yourself parameters or structure? Like, can you just talk a little bit, I guess, about how you approach improvisation?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and in fact, I recently released a book of exactly that. Okay. So it's 10 basically structures that I recommend to start improvising, and so it's called Improvisation Etudes, Volume 1. And I worked on it for about, I guess, 4 or 5 years. It was kind of a slow burn, to get to it. And where it came out of actually was that I didn't do much with it, unfortunately, but I guess 4 or 5 years ago, I started, kind of like putting ideas down in a blog, and I was calling it just #improvise, like that was the hashtag for it. Right. And, but the cool thing about it was that I got my ideas out there, and then I started calling up people that I wanted to play with. And, some people I hadn't met before that, I never played with. Some people I played with for years. And, we just improvised together, and I recorded them. And, they're still out there, which is kind of cool. Right. And what we did was I had these cards, and you can actually download them on my website under sheet music. They're free. Sure. And so they're just little structure cards. So it could be like, if you're playing pitched instruments, or if you're with other instrumentalists, it might say set a key, or it might say pick 3 notes, or set a time limit, groove based, song like. And then you put a bunch of them in a hat, or I normally use this big tomato can. I'm Italian, so
right.
I have those laying around.
Sure.
And so I pull them out of the can, and as long as they apply, you leave them there, and then you just go for it. And that was like how it kind of started. And that's how I've when I go do improv clinics, that's like what I do every time. Is like we do big improvisations with these cards, and it's a lot of fun.
Sure. And so that's a process you sort of developed, or is that something you picked up in your education or exploration?
I definitely didn't make it up. I got the idea from like this. I guess it's not really the ideas for the structure, but I got the idea to explore like how to teach somebody how to improvise from Bill Kahn's book.
Oh, okay.
That whole creative music making process that he has, and he has no limitations. It's just basically you start playing and then you stop playing, right. And it's a whole process of recording it and talking about it. And he was really gracious, actually. He checked out my book, and we were in conversations like a lot right before I released it back in March. So I shout out to Bill Kahn for that. And but yeah, so it was like, definitely different from his mindset of just, going for it. Mine's a little bit more structured. Yeah. But I wanted to kind of encourage people to use it in their practice, because that's how I started out using it. Besides like playing in that dark practice room with a bunch of people and just going nuts, like I also would, when I remember the first time like learning Porgy and Bess, and I'm like pulling my hair out, with some of the lines, and then I just started improvising around like what I always like to call them zones, right? Okay. And they're like really Porgy, the first few measures is based off of 6 notes. Sure. So it's really not as, complex as we like as percussionists like think about it. I mean, it is and it isn't. It's like you have to just get comfortable with these zones and then master those. So it's not just about practicing it. For me, at least, it didn't work just to practice something over and over again the same way. And it really helped me internalize what I was playing.
So using improvisation as a tool to become more comfortable with content or pieces that might be more technically challenging, you found that to be pretty helpful.
Definitely, yeah. And I play a lot of contemporary music, and we'll probably get into that later. But like playing that music, sometimes I spend a whole practice session on 1 measure or 2 measures, because it's just it's that technically or just mentally challenging, and so I use improvisation a lot. To learn music and again internalize it so that it goes beyond just on the page.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's a great point, because 2 things, like Bill's philosophy, if I understand, like kind of limitless improvisation, almost like what I talked to Gloria about it. We kind of agreed that could actually be a little limiting, because if you don't have any limits, there's no boundaries really. So it's like you almost get overwhelmed on which direction to go, or kind of what thought you want to musically get out. And shoot, my other point. I forgot my other point. But that was a really good point, Anthony.
No, that was, and actually that just made me think of something too. Like when you said it was limiting, I actually also think of like my pieces, for instance, as like they are my pieces, so it's not 100% original for the or not. I shouldn't say original. It's not 100%. The players, it's like mine, you know what I mean? It still sounds like me in a sense. And so what I have encouraged anyone who has checked out the book is, I hope that they use these to explore kind of their voice within those limitations that I've provided, but then also, hopefully they start making their own improv etudes, or they make their own improvisation material. So it's not like a be-all, end-all, and I think that's the beautiful thing. And like even Gloria and I, we collaborated on a video last week, and kind of did a similar thing where we mashed like our 2 ways that we improvise together. And I think that's the best part about it, is like we can explore this free space in our own way.
Today's episode is brought to you by Primephonic, the streaming service designed for classical music. Primephonic is here to save classical music for the streaming era. The app features high-res audio, radio on demand, curated playlists, and podcasts with famous artists. Times are tough these days, but Primephonic pays classical musicians in a fair way, paying per second and not per track. This is a huge deal compared to the other services that only pay artists per song. The app features a massive catalog featuring some of our favorites here at the shop, like John Cage, Steve Reich, Evelyn Glennie, and Ivan Trevino. For a limited time, Black Swamp Podcast listeners are getting 2 months free of Primephonic with the exclusive promo code BLACKSWAMP. Visit the link in the show notes, enter the promo code, and you're good to go. Again, that promo code is BLACKSWAMP, all caps and all one word. Primephonic, the streaming service designed for classical music.
Next, I have a fun conversation with Andrew Baldwin and step a bit outside the orchestral percussion improvisation vein. Besides being a percussionist, drum set player, and composer, Andrew is also involved in the Second City School of Comedy, which we connect to his musical activities and performance, specifically having some tools in your improvisational toolbox as starting points. We jump into this conversation right after Andrew explains his work with Second City, and of course, you can scroll back through our episodes to find the full conversation. Yeah, it was super cool. I mean, is there anything that carries over to kind of music performance? Any philosophies or concepts, or just being on stage or performance in general? Or
everything.
Again, am I stretching here?
No, everything. Everything ties over, especially because I'm, into jazz and into jazz improv, and I like free improv a lot, or I just love improv of any kind. So they are 100%. If you're talking about music improv and then acting or comedic improv, the parallels are spot on. But as far as, like you were saying, performance, just getting up in front of people and doing things out of your comfort zone. How many classical musicians, I'll never jazz or free improv because that's out of my comfort zone. So you do something like this and it helps. It helps give you different perspectives on things. It keeps you sharp-witted, because you're trying to say something that's not completely ridiculous, but, and also like being organic, because you can really tell if someone tries to shoehorn a line in that they think is funny, and then,
they're working a little too hard.
Yeah, and, it takes away what it does, it takes away from the ensemble that's happening. You're trying to make it about you. Sure. You're trying to show that you're funny. Whereas realistically, the similarities in what should be the similarities in performance when you're in an improv group or an ensemble is it's about the ensemble. And I quote Drumline, the movie, so much, even though I personally do not like
that's too bad.
Drumline. Don't get me wrong. I like the movie. I don't much. It's an art form in and of itself, but it's not my cup of tea. But it's like if one of us looks or sound bad, you all look and sound bad. So
sort of the weakest link concept.
Exactly. But bringing it back to the similarities between improv, musical, and non-musical is you're taught to listen. Right, you're taught to enhance the other people in the group, and you're taught that they have your back. So that's all. Taking jazz improv classes. That's the thing. You don't want to step on someone else's toes. You don't want to say too much. You don't want to give too much away. If you just keep rambling and rambling, then it loses its punch, and no one cares what you're doing. So they're perfectly the same. Like I teach at a band camp at Whitewater every summer, and I do jazz things there. I teach jazz improv and direct the jazz band, and this obviously not this past year because of the virus, but 2 years prior, most of the exercises I did with my improv kids were acting improv exercises, because there's this one exercise where, and it works better with a small group of 10 versus 40 to 50 middle schoolers. But there's this exercise where you all spread out, and then one person has to, just freely moves around, but then you have to pass off the ability to move, by making direct eye contact, and non-verbally you have to, signal to someone it's your turn to go. And then, so you're teaching, and in jazz, that's, all the nonverbals we use to be like, all right, like solo, we're trading fours. Right. Then there's variations on that exercise, and one is taking the focus, because sometimes someone will keep going, and you say, I have to rein it in, and it's that same exact exercise, except only one person can be moving at a time. but you don't know who's going to start doing it and who's going to start doing it when. So then if you're the person moving, that means you're hyper vigilant. You're on your toes. Who's going to move? Because the second someone else starts moving, you have to stop. So that's just teaching you to be hyper aware of your surroundings, which,
Yeah.
So
it's good anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps you become a better jazzer and just a better human in general.
Yeah. Well, so I've had, on the podcast, conversations with Gloria Yehilievsky, who, she was recently in Chicago. And then just the last episode with Anthony Bartolo, who both of them are very into improvisation and what I would consider more of, I don't want to say legit, but kind of orchestral improvisation, or like Anthony is really into electronics and looping and stuff like that, but also improvisation. So it's cool to hear like your perspective as more of as a jazz musician, like talking about improvisation from a jazz perspective, and kind of that interaction with people, and when to not step on people's toes, or when to shift focus or not have something be all about yourself. My only interaction with improvisation was when I did a lot of steel band gigs. So we'd be a small combo. So I'm typically played double seconds. Then there was a lead player, and then usually sometimes a guitar player that would solo, in our quintet or whatever. So, one question I had for you is, what are kind of the rules of engagement, if there are any? But we would talk, murmur before we start, okay, I'm going to take 2 solos and you take 2 solos, or we'll just go around or do this. So we kind of figured it out, but we were so used to playing with each other, we knew what the other person was doing. And actually, sometimes they would give me a hard time because they knew exactly, when I was about to take a solo, they knew exactly what I was going to play. Every song, solo, and each song kind of started the exact same way. And then I kind of went from there. Do you kind of see those, when you're working with kids, like, are there kind of rules of engagement, 1? And then 2, is there maybe some advice, like to not do, I would get stuck basically on the same lick, the same little run, or the same this, and then just kind of play it in every solo that I played, or that's how everything started. Like, is there, kind of something you would, suggest to a young player or performer, like, hey, this is a good exercise to kind of get out of that rut? So I sort of wrapped 2 questions into
I'm
one.
Trying to. I was going to answer it in a very cohesive way. So I'm gonna.
Right.
I said that I'm still gonna do what I said I didn't want to do. It's right. Like 2 trains of thought that a lot of people talk about, right? Are learn licks that you like from other people, and then try and fit them in different places, blah blah blah. Then you have people that say don't learn other people's licks. Those are other people's things, and then you're not thinking of your own ideas. I personally think that there's nothing wrong with learning other people's ideas, because at some point that's all you're doing whenever you start something new, is learning someone else's ideas, and then you can take things you like and change it up a little, or take that lick. And I'm kind of thinking on percussion specifically, drum. Right. I'm thinking drum set right now, but you can apply it to melodic instruments. Take a lick, and if it fits over the chords, try putting where if it ends on the 1 of the next beat, have it end on the and of 1, or have it land on the 2, and you can feel the different stresses, and then you can maybe hear, oh well, if it ends here, I would like this to go before it. And then practicing your licks in all the keys, that usual thing. I hated that. I hated that so much. Yeah. And that's not.
Well, when I was in grad school, I did take like a summer semester of jazz improv, like on vibraphone, and it was the saxophone professor that I studied from, and we had to transcribe. So I was learning, I transcribed some. I took it easy on myself, like Chet Baker solos, like trumpet solos, which I mean I just love Chet Baker anyways. And his solos were like really musical but kind of simple. So I'm like, yeah, I think I can maybe transcribe that. And then okay, now I got to learn this lick in every key or whatever. Like, oh great, now I got to know I got to remember all my keys and all my scales and everything. So
when I was learning theory and stuff, I was, again, not to brag, but I was really good at theory. But I say that to say I learned, like, all of my ear training was on numbers, so I did, like, I'm actually very, very, very bad at solfege, but I am very good at, I say that to say that my numbers really transferred to, chord alterations and things. So when I think of a melody, it's easier for me, because that's how my mind has worked forever, to see the melody in its, scale numbers. So then that's easier to transfer when you're doing the transpositions. But that's another good thing, is listening to transcribing other instrument solos. So if with vibraphone, right, you listen to anybody, and it's just trying to make like weird stick crossings work. But that's important, because then, I was thinking Mark Juliana, because we have this nice drum store. It's actually in my neighborhood of Chicago, and it's called the Chicago Music Exchange. And
oh yeah, right.
Yeah, Mark Juliana just happened to be there one day as I was walking by doing a clinic or something. And so I walk in, and he's talking about similarly, where this guy was like, I'm learning these licks and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, there's nothing wrong with learning licks, but the lick is whatever the lick is, it's something in your toolbox. And then you have to take that and you have to do something to it, not just to make it your own, but it adds something new to your toolbox. So, if you're working on some triplet groove and you notice, oh, it's really hard to do this, then make an exercise out of whatever is weak. And then that will eventually, you build up your dexterity, but then that becomes another thing to add to your toolbox.
Finally, we talked to percussion and improvisation veteran Tony DiSanza. Tony's been working with Tom Curry and Mark Hetzler, fellow University of Wisconsin-Madison colleagues, having released a CD last fall titled Don't Look Down. This is a super interesting mix of tuba, trombone, and percussion, which includes electronics, sequencing, processing, and of course, improvisation, all very unexpected and unique. Similar to the conversation I just had with Andrew, Tony and I talk about creativity, borrowing ideas and making them your own, and challenging yourself to try something different, even if it makes you uncomfortable, which it often does for me.
For me, improvisation, I remember going back to high school, sitting in a dark practice room in the music facility and just playing piano. Not really realizing what I was doing, but just enjoying the sonorities and the creation of music spontaneously.
Yeah, sure.
And then in undergrad school, we had a band together called the Outboard Motors, and it was a free improv bar band.
Okay.
So we'd play 4-hour gigs of complete improvisation, typical band, sort of guitar, bass, keyboards, couple percussionists. So for me, the improvisation has always been a big part of my life and something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And when I left graduate studies, when I left Ann Arbor to go to Kansas, there was no one really around, and I'm not a jazz improviser, so I don't have that outlet. So my improvisation is more on the free side. Then it was like 10 years I didn't really get to improvise much with other people, because when I was in Kansas, I just couldn't find a relationship with somebody to do that sort of playing with.
Right.
And even initially moving to Madison, when I was first playing a lot of global music, we'd improvise, but it was always sort of in style. Around rhythmic material. And then when Todd came to town, that was for me like, oh, we could start doing this again. And then Mark moved to town. And so I found enough people around Madison to sort of reinvent that for myself. For me, I think this goes to me what is my favorite thing about being a percussionist is the same answer to the thing about improvisation, is that I love playing in an orchestra. I love playing contemporary chamber music. I love playing global music. I love playing Brazilian music in a bar. I love freely improvising, and percussion affords us, to do all these things if our interest in the field is to do a variety of things. Of course, we have some great artists in our field who choose to be a little more narrow, and that's amazing and great. I've always taken the sort of wide pool approach, and improvisation has always just been a part of that for me. And I think because of the nature of the instrument, it always felt really natural. So I guess maybe that's the long answer. The short answer is I love the idea of creating music spontaneously with other people and the challenges that creates.
Yeah, cool.
And with Todd, for like the recordings for the Music with Tubes series, we don't talk at all. There is no conversation of, oh, you want to try this? Let's do that. We finish something, we might say, hey, that kind of felt good, or say, I didn't like that.
Yeah. But
we don't talk much about it. When we were in the studio, we got a drink of water, came back, here we go.
Yeah.
One of us makes a gesture and we start again.
Yeah. So my only real experience with improvisation is in more of a kind of a formal sense with playing in steel band and playing, taking a solo, whatever, 8, 16 with bars or whatever. And one of my own inside jokes is that I had a couple licks that I would fall back on when I would play. Like, do you ever notice that, where it's like, okay, we're gonna play something and you're like, okay, that's exactly, even though it's completely free, it's completely improvised, you have the entire whatever soundscape world at your fingertips, and you kind of play the same thing that you played last time when you sat down? Like, does that ever happen? And then how do you kind of push yourself out of it?
It certainly happens to me. And I sometimes find it happens when I'm choosing instruments.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
Like there's some instruments in Tubes and More that I used a bunch in Don't Look Down. And I realized, oh my gosh, so I think one of the ways that I try to sort of push my way out of that is by choosing, making sure I'm, by the instrument choices.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, okay, if I fall back on this instrument regularly, and every time I have it in my hands, I tend to play this. Yeah. How about if I get rid of that instrument?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say also, Tim, that sometimes I look at that sort of those fallbacks as not necessarily a bad thing too.
Sure.
That some of that is my repertoire. Yeah. Those are my repertoire of ideas. And in reality, I'm not sure how much in our world is new any longer in any field.
Yeah.
We've been around long enough, we've explored enough, we've shared enough.
Yeah.
That I don't mind having some things that are sort of, oh yeah, that's Tony, because I've heard him play that. I certainly want to avoid the bag of tricks, and here's the bag, and this is the lick that always comes out after this one. So yeah, I know exactly of what you speak, and I totally find myself having to work against that.
Well, I mean, and that's what I would fall into, because I could feel it on the inside, but then I really knew what was happening when we'd play in a combo, and the guitar player, we got done with a piece, and we were about to start a piece, I think, and the guitar player was like, "Oh, I can't wait to hear Tim's lick when he's, the same lick he plays on this piece. I can't wait for him to play that when we get to the solo." And that, which I guess was a compliment in a sense, but I was like, "Oh wow, it's that predictable." But I took, just moving back a bit, like as far as there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, I totally get what you're saying, that, and then kind of having your repertoire, I think, is an interesting way to look at it. Like, it may be an improvisatory setting, but you kind of have your tools, I guess, in your toolkit,
right,
and something to kind of build or work off of. So
yeah, I'm not even fully convinced any longer after all these years. In the last year, have I played anything that was absolutely made me go, wow, I've never thought of that before.
Yeah, sure.
And, we keep searching for those, and hopefully I'll keep finding them. But again, like you're right, it's hard. And we do develop a bag.
Yeah.
But I think, anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the topic of improvisation. Maybe in the future, we can explore some other topics that have popped up in past episodes the last year or so. Otherwise, this has been a BSP production, recorded and produced out of the Black Swamp Percussion facilities in Zeeland, Michigan. Audio and production assistance by Nathan Coles. Intro and outro music by Adam Hopper. Music sprinkled throughout the episode featured compositions and performances by our best of guests, Gloria, Anthony, Andrew, and Tony. Visit this episode's show notes for links to their content and activities.